Hi everyone, and welcome to our Coping Well During COVID series and to our webinar today, BAME Community Wellbeing. We're very excited to offer you this topic, and we're more excited that we have David Truswell joining us today. I want to introduce you to him. So basically, David has worked for several years as a senior manager in community-based mental health services in London, in the London Borough of Brent, and he worked from 2005 to 2008. He led a trust-wide programme as part of the NHS, delivering Race Equality Action Plan for Central and North West London NHS Trust, at that time one of the UK's largest mental health charities. Editor and contributing author of a recent book supporting people from Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities living with dementia. He is also Executive Director of the Dementia Alliance for Culture and Ethnicity and Chair of PLIAS Resettlement, an organisation working with vulnerable groups such as those with mental health issues or from BAME communities in the criminal justice system. He works mainly as a writer and health and social care consultant, and he is joining us today for the webinar, and he will be live later on. So I know we're excited to meet him, but we'll just hold off following our introduction. We'll then bring him on. So before that, I want to show you how to use the Q&A function of the webinar, and this is something we're going to use throughout today's webinar to make it as interactive as possible. So I want to show you how to use this, and we're going to start by finding how it works. So if you click on the box with the question mark, so it should be in the top right hand corner of your page. So if you click on that, it's a blue circle with the question mark, and then there's an option to enter your name or to click on the small box by the blue arrow, which is our preference, that you post your questions or information anonymously so that we can keep your data confidential. So once you've done that, enter your question and then click on the arrow to send. Your posts won't be published immediately because they need to go through moderation. So one of our moderators will check and approve them, and that may take a few moments before they appear. If you do wish your question to be private for the moderators only, then just add private at the beginning of your question or comment, and then that conversation will remain private and won't be published. We might not be able to answer everyone's questions, but your responses and your involvement will be helpful for other webinar attendees and for us as we do go through them. We will save some time at the end of today's webinar for a question and answer. So if you do have any questions for David or myself, then please hold on to them, and then at the end, if you post them in the Q&A, we will go through those questions and answer as many as we can. So let's try out the Q&A function now. So keeping your identity anonymous, tell us who you are here for. So if you go to the Q&A, there is an option to have a look at the comments there, and I want you to like or press the thumbs up to which one of these apply to you. So if you're here for A, yourself, then click A. For a family member or friend who is struggling, click B. For well, as a professional, then click C, or in any other capacity, click D. So that will tell us a little bit more about who you're here for, and I'll come back to your responses in a few moments. So this webinar today is part of a larger series of webinars designed to help with the impact caused by the coronavirus. And the theme of each webinar is different each week. And each of the webinars is focusing on the different ways that your well-being may have been impacted. And we want to firstly focus on helping you to understand maybe why you feel the way you feel, but also give you some strategies and techniques to help you to manage the way that you feel. So let's have a look at your responses now and see who you are here for today. So I'm just going to bring up the Q&A now and just have a look and see. And I can see already that most of you are here for yourself, so that's great. So I really hope that today you go away with some really useful ideas and things to think about as a result of today's webinar. So yes. Also, we forgot to mention at the beginning of the webinar today that the slides might be running a bit slow when we were looking through them earlier. There was a slight delay. So if you do notice a delay, they will catch up eventually. And we do apologise for these technical difficulties. OK, so I'd like to ask another question for you today. What do you hope to get out of this webinar? So if you add your hopes to the Q&A, we'll come to those in a few moments. So I want to tell you a little bit about this series of webinars. So if this is the only webinar that you've attended, it's, as I said, it's part of a series of webinars designed to provide you with a toolkit of evidence-based resources and ideas and tools. And the techniques and strategies that we offer are based on cognitive behavioural therapy, which is a very effective therapy for anxiety and depression. And CBT focuses on making changes to our thoughts and also our behaviour with the hope to improve our mood. And so that's essentially what the webinar series is about. But this webinar in particular is a little bit different. And when planning this series of webinars, we knew that this was going to be an important topic, and it was one that we really wanted to get right. And I also knew that I didn't feel comfortable delivering this topic on my own, as I'm not a member of the BAME community, and I felt unable to speak on your behalf, and felt that it would be necessary for me to partner with someone who has lived experience. We also wanted someone with a rich history and understanding of how mental health has and does impact different minority communities. And David has worked in community-based mental health services in the UK for over 30 years. And he has been a fantastic advocate for people from Black, Asian and minority ethnic backgrounds. And we're so excited and fortunate when he agreed to join us today for this webinar. So in this webinar, David will start by considering the challenges that Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities are facing during this time, based on his own experience and observation. And then based on these observations, we'll then consider strategies and techniques to support your well-being now and as lockdown restrictions begin to ease. So let's come to your hopes for the webinar. Let's have a look at your responses. How to manage my fears and worries better. Factors influencing vulnerability of BAME communities to COVID-19. Tips and practical advice how to improve BAME wellbeing, especially in the context of COVID and current news. So for a couple of these already, these are things that we're going to be covering today. So that's the good news. Coping skills and how to support others. Understanding information relevant to the BAME communities, to support staff and service users who are BAME. Lovely. So it sounds like a mixture of hopes here today that are very relevant to the content of our webinar. So that's fantastic. It sounds like we've got the right audience and we're all in the right place, which is great. OK, we have another question. We want to ask you about what you are finding most difficult at the moment. So if you let us know in the Q&A now, just share with us some of the challenges, some of the difficulties you've been experiencing within the last few months, and we'll come to those shortly. It has been a really challenging time and we've all been through a difficult time, but particularly we are very much aware that members of Black, Asian and minority ethnic groups are having a harder time in many ways. And it has been a roller coaster of emotions and things have felt incredibly uncertain and unpredictable. And so we want to really let you know that it is OK to not feel OK, and it makes sense that you might be struggling with your own well-being, or perhaps your family members or people that you care about might also be struggling. And you may feel fine one moment and things are going wonderfully and you're managing to cope really well, but then the next moment you may feel overwhelmed. And emotions like these are all expected. They're all normal. We've all had to make a lot of changes to prevent the spread of this virus. And whilst those changes have been necessary for our physical health, they have an unfortunate impact on our mental health. And a lot of the changes that have been made to our routines, our activities, the structure of our day have impacted ourselves, whether it's increased financial pressure or a change in routine. All of these changes are going to impact the way we feel, increase our level of stress, worry and anxiety. And that can leave us feeling really frustrated or even helpless and overwhelmed. So if you are feeling like you're really struggling and like you don't feel like you have anywhere to turn, we wanted you to know where you can turn if you need immediate support. So if you're having thoughts of suicide or of harming yourself in any way, then we really encourage you to talk to someone. Don't struggle alone. So we recommend the Samaritans, and they're here to listen at any time of day or night. And you can talk to them about anything that's troubling you. So call them for free on 116 123. So before we move on to David's part of our webinar today, I want to just have a look at what you're struggling with, some of the challenges that you've been dealing with. So I'm going to go through some of these now. So many deaths of family and friends by COVID, and those that have passed, as well as and not to be able to partake in funerals culturally, feeling labelled, uncertain future in this difficult economy, and BAME staff will be unfairly affected. Absolutely. Lack of equality or equity, the death of many BAME and the impacts on me as individual with underlying medical condition. Absolutely. Staying motivated and focused on my everyday and job whilst feeling sad and tired and overwhelmed. Personally knowing that I'm at higher risk as part of BAME community plus health issues, but trying to convey this to management, feeling pressure to go back to work whilst not feeling ready and safe. Absolutely. And so I would love to go through all of these, but we might not have time to. But maybe if you have a look through some of these responses here, and maybe click like if that's felt relevant to you or you've struggled with something similar. Just to kind of, I guess, share the burden and challenges that we're maybe all facing or different communities might be experiencing. So press like if you're struggling with a similar challenge. And thank you so much for sharing those difficulties and challenges. And it does give us a bit more of a sense of some of those difficulties that you are experiencing. So now I'm going to hand over to David, who will take the next part of our webinar today. And so over to you, David.
Okay, thanks very much. Thanks, Emily. Right, I think it's important from the get-go that people don't think that they're going to shrug off this experience. And I think that the fact that we're all going through the worst health crisis for over 100 years is bound to be something that shakes our lives. And this is something that nobody expected, and we can see from the variety of government responses, pretty much no government on the planet was actually ready for. It's affected everybody everywhere at the same time. So unlike a kind of personal crisis where you might be able to turn to people who were not affected by the crisis and get support, that's not the case with the pandemic. We know it's been going on for many months, and I think that we all are gradually coming to realise that we're going to have to maybe face the fact that consequences psychologically and economically may go on for at least months and possibly for years. It may be that the economic adjustments globally carry on for years, and I think for some people the psychological impact may well have a sense of persisting for years. I want to say from the get-go, none of us are tougher than the virus. It is tougher than we all are. So trying to find a way through to regaining and reclaiming the sense of confidence that I'm sure we all want to have about our future and our lives. It is about thinking about recovery, thinking about the fact it's going to take a while. And it's not about assuming that some kind of mythical tough-mindedness and individuality and individualism is going to see us through. in and of itself, because I think that's not the way forward, really. Can I move the slides on? Oh, good. So the first thing that I thought that we might think about is the relationships that people have found important during this period, and it would be interesting if people would like to share with everybody else participating what relationships they found most supported during the pandemic period. So while you're thinking about that, let me just say that when I'm talking about relationships, I'm thinking about not just family relationships, but obviously relationships with partners, relationships with friends, children, parents. But I think one of the things that's come to the fore during the pandemic period is also relationships with neighbours, or relationships with delivery drivers. For some people, particularly who've been shielding, then it's been about relationships with volunteers who deliver food, deliver medication. And certainly that's been something that was very important for me at the early part of this, the lockdown. A lot of us have found that we've been managing our relationships online, on the phone, on our PCs in this period. And I also want to kind of flag up the fact that for some people it's been quite important that they've had a supportive relationship, as far as they're concerned, through having a pet. I think that's something that can be overlooked, really. So let's have a look at the relationships people maybe are saying that have been important to them. Okay. And somebody's saying that they're keeping in contact with friends and family has been vital, and video calls with colleagues, team members. And also somebody saying they're valuing online services and ways to communicate more. So that gives us a bit of a picture of what people have found to be really important and useful for them during this time. I think another thing that maybe people have come to realise, mainly because this has been going on for so long, is that routines in and of themselves are really important for people's sense of stability in their lives, over and above the people involved in their lives, that the way in which their lives have organised, particularly around work, has often been something that's really gone through an upheaval in this period. So again, for those who want to, why not share with us what you feel have been the changes in routine that's had the most impact on you? What do you think? And again, while you're thinking about that, let's flag up a few things that I've been thinking myself about in with relation to these routines. Obviously, a huge one will have been the loss of income from work for a lot of people, or reduction of income, the loss of regularity of work. I think for many people who discovered working from home or working from home more during the lockdown, it's been a huge upheaval. But even for people who've been continuing to work, I think in a lot of cases, people may have found that the work location's been changed, or that there've been dramatic changes at the workplace to deal with some of the requirements that have been introduced as a result of the pandemic. And on a day-to-day basis, people will have lost all the routine organisation, even of travelling to work, or at lunchtime, wherever they go regularly for a break, a sandwich, even a cigarette break. I think when you lose these things over a long period of time, you suddenly realise how important they are for structuring your sense of how your life works and how your day works. For a large number of people, then, particularly for children, the loss of school and the routines of school has been a big disruption. And I'm sure that was fine for the first couple of days, but when it goes on for months, it's a different ball game. Similarly, for parents who are thrown into the situation where they're suddenly the educators on a regular basis for their children, it would have come as a shock. And for many people also the other activities of their life, like their hobbies, like their place of worship, and places that they would ordinarily go to congregate. In terms of the worship, it might be a church, a synagogue, a mosque, a temple, or other venues that they go to worship at. It might be a particular club in the community that they congregate at. It might be, again, across different black and minority ethnic communities, coffee shops, tea shops, barber shops, hairdressers, bakeries, all these kinds of social nexuses will have been lost during this period. A lot of the voluntary organisations, and I've been involved with quite a few, have either stopped all their activities or transferred what activities they can online. And also it's meant for people who work on a voluntary basis, they've not been able to do their voluntary work. But so let's have a bit of a look at what people think about the impact of them on changes in their routines. Okay, people have worked from home, lost the routine of going to work. It's an interesting one, somebody pointing out that they developed a consistent meditation and prayer routine. They've begin to work on their own routine changes. People have experienced a change from working from home to work. And somebody points out the feeling of Groundhog Day. I know what that feels like. And I'm sure many people do. So let's move on. Thank you for those contributions by people who commented. One of the things that was mentioned very early on in the chat, as I noticed, is the impact of loss and bereavement. And I think for the black and minority ethnic communities, there's been a particular severe impact of loss and bereavement, not just through the more obvious things of people's personal experience of bereavement, but supporting other people with bereavement. And for communities, particularly at the locality level, in some cases down to the level of streets where families have lost members, several families have lost family members within a particular street or particular area. And I think that's had an important kind of sense of community loss has been created there. And I think what's compounded the sense of confusion, frustration, and anxiety in relation to that, of course, is the way in which the management of and requirements of social distances has affected both being engaged with people towards the end of life and also funeral and burial arrangements. For black, minority and ethnic communities, there's an intimacy about the involvement with the process of coming to the end of life and burial and mourning that has been massively disrupted by the arrangements for COVID and the requirements around social distancing and reducing risk. So it seems to me that the black and minority ethnic communities through this period, are living through almost an environmental landscape of loss whose magnitude we've not really realised and understood yet. And it may take quite a while for us to really see how significant that has been across the board for Black and minority ethnic communities. And I think that's quite a large topic to dwell on, and we don't have time for in this particular session. So I want to kind of move to talking about a feature of the experience that particularly I think also is a concern, which is people's anxiety about COVID-19, the illness itself. I wonder if people would want to share any fears they've had about COVID-19 as a disease. By that, I mean some of the anxieties people would have had about contracting COVID-19, and also some of the anxieties they might have had about spreading the virus, particularly if they were not symptomatic. I think it's important for people to recognise that the kind of management of the physical risk, like the glove wearing, the mask wearing, the keeping your distance, the hand washing, important as that also is for physically managing, reducing the risk of infection. It's important for helping us to manage our anxiety about what's going on. There's more to those physical measures than just the behaviours in themselves. It's also about what it means for us in terms of feeling able to manage our anxiety. But let's move on to what people may be thinking and prepared to share about their fears. Somebody's pointing out that you can't see it, and it can affect anyone with devastating consequences. I think that's a really good point, because I think there's a kind of almost dreamlike, nightmarish quality to this experience of trying to kind of understand something that we can't see, that's so devastating. People pointing out that they worry about giving the virus to vulnerable people without realising it, and their concerns about people not wearing masks or taking it seriously. Somebody usefully pointed out that we still don't know what the life impact is for people once they've had the virus. So absolutely right, for many people, just the fact of having had the virus doesn't mean it's over. And somebody also pointed out that their fears began when they heard stories of BAME people being infected but symptoms not being taken seriously, and they later went on to lose their lives. Again, thanks very much for the contributions that people are making, and I appreciate the fact that with the constraints of the time we have here, we're not going to be able to go through everybody's contribution, but they're really valuable, as Emily was saying before. Thanks very much for the contributions. They really are important, even if I can't go through everyone in detail. An important point that I want to make in doing this is that for Black and minority ethnic communities, in my view, one of the huge challenges for them is that there are social features and elements to the pandemic that, in a sense, magnify for them the impact of the experience on their lives. One of the ones that we know a fair amount about now is the as was pointed out in the Public Health England report, that the health vulnerabilities that have been there for a long time for Black, Asian and minority communities, that are historic and also current, that are created by the institutionalised economic and social discrimination. So that's lifetime experience of economic marginalisation and social marginalisation, and the health impact means that as a set of communities, they've been much more vulnerable to this particular pandemic. And one doesn't want to dwell on it for long, but there's a depressing inevitability of commentators who feel that they must come out and blame ethnic communities for everything, and so of course they must come out and blame ethnic communities for the spread of the virus. I think an important issue for Black and minority ethnic communities is the wave of protest and the idea of the importance of re-evaluating systemic brutality that arose after the fact that George Floyd died after a police officer kneeled on his neck for 8 minutes and 43 seconds, has been to some extent by some media sources sidelined into what I see as a fruitless debate about statues of dead slave owners. And I think that it's important to recognise that the issue for minority communities in relation to Black Lives Matter is systematic brutality, and that's the issue that I think we need to kind of understand. We need to make some progress with socially and civilly. I think that what's been important in relation for most people in terms of their support arrangements has been the use of social media during this period, but I think there's also a sense in which sometimes, unfortunately, living your life in social media can feel like being trapped in a fear gallery where the only thing that you hear about is bad things happening to people. The only thing that you hear about is oppression, and the only thing that you hear about is disadvantage. And I think that leaves people feeling quite isolated and helpless and persecuted, and it's important for people to feel that there are routes out of that kind of sense of being trapped in those kinds of situations. So it'd be interesting again to hear from people who are participating at the moment, and given that there is a range of areas of discrimination I just highlighted there, and people will have plenty of examples of their own. What kind of positive steps, though, do you think you could take to help you manage your experience of discrimination? It would be really interesting if you felt able to share what positive steps you thought might be useful. But while you're thinking about that, again, I'd want to add that there are a few things that did occur to me, and actually are things that I've been exercising over this period myself in terms of how I've been looking for support. I think, again, there's a downside to social media, but there's also an upside. It is an opportunity for people to connect and interact and get support and share anxieties with people who are like-minded and friendly disposed toward them. I think particularly as we're thinking about returning to work arrangements for people, many organisations have formal support mechanisms for Black staff, and I think they're going to be an important resource for people as part of the return to work arrangements as people begin to move out of lockdown. But let's also not forget the importance of informal relationships in work and what they do to help people. I think particularly with some of the sort of microaggression irritations that that may feel like they just, you know, end up otherwise giving you a very bad day. And I think it's important to recognise that for a lot of people, the folk who are involved in those informal support relationships aren't just people from the Black, Asian and minority ethnic background, but other people as well, not least because many people in sort of white mainstream UK community have Black friends, they have partners, they have people in their families who either are from a Black, Asian and minority ethnic background or identify with that heritage. So I think they're an underrated aspect of people's support services. And I also think it's important that as we come through to rebuild our understanding of our lives and our the impact of the pandemic, that we make the effort to consciously reconnect, you know, to those people that we've been talking to for weeks, if not months, over the internet, that we say, look, it's really been important, it's really been valuable to me to have these conversations. It's really been great that you've listened. And maybe to step that up to say, isn't it about time that we went for a coffee, because we haven't done this for a long time? Isn't it about time we went for something to eat, not least because the government's given us 10 quid off the meal? But these kind of conscious efforts to re-establish the importance of personal social networks, I think, are really important. And I think also what's important for people, and again, particularly from Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities, in recovering and moving forward and rebuilding from this experience, is having the confidence and building the confidence through action to push back against discrimination, whatever that action is, whatever works for you. That might be signing a petition, that might be joining a campaign group, that might be wearing a t-shirt, that might be formally joining a group within a political organisation that you're involved in, that might be lobbying your MP. But I think it's important to make a conscious effort to regain a sense of active agency in your life and a sense of moving forward against any sense of discrimination you're having in your life. Much more important than just drowning in a sense of isolation, helplessness, and a lack of connection with any kind of support system. So I think that's part of a healthy approach to your well-being. So let's see what people are saying about positive steps. Great, somebody here is saying they've been sharing their experiences with non-white, Black, Asian, minority ethnic friends and colleagues, and having those awkward conversations. Fantastic. Looking to peers for support. Brilliant. Being open and honest about challenges and fears with managers and colleagues. Excellent. Fantastic. Knowing my rights and policies that support my addressing discrimination properly in the workplace and society. I think there's some excellent points being made by people. Reading and learning more about shared narratives and experience of racism. Ensuring those at risk are treated fairly and given opportunities to reduce their risk. Holding difficult conversations. So it's good to see people are already doing that kind of constructive, positive thinking about what they can do to address these kind of challenges in their life for the benefit of their well-being. So I think we're coming.
David, you're on mute. David, you're on mute. There we go.
Okay, I accidentally switched myself off. We're coming towards the end of this piece now. Thanks for your contributions about the positive steps that we just run through a few of those. But I'd just like to say in summary, because really I've been looking at the challenges. Emily's going to talk in more detail about the solutions. Again, it's a period of rebuilding. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take a while. But folk who think that they can just shrug off the going through with everybody else in the world the worst health crisis for 100 years are in denial. You know, they're not tough guys, they're in denial. And I think the important element of thinking about how people rebuild their lives and their sense of confidence through this experience is to think about rebuilding their relationships, re-establishing routines, and finding the positive outlets they need to bring back the energy and the joy and the enthusiasm into their lives, because there's been a sense that this whole experience has flattened the joy out of some elements of our lives, for sure, against just being consumed by people's sense of anger and frustration. So it really is about moving on and moving on up, and Emily's going to tell us how to do that. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, David, for sharing with us your observations and experience. You know, we're really grateful that you were able to join us today. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I'll stay with you to the end, and we'll pick up some questions at the end too.
Absolutely, thank you. So we'll just spend a little bit of time thinking about how to manage our well-being coming out of lockdown, and based on some of the challenges that David has shared today and that we've been discussing. And so we've taken a number of themes from his thoughts and want to share a few strategies to help you to manage. So firstly, obviously David has talked about rebuilding of relationships, and we have a technique called scaffolding, which I'll talk to you about briefly in a few moments, and also about re-establishing routines and our meaning and things of value. So we're going to talk a bit about value directions, and then thinking about those positive outlets for anger and frustration, and what we can do to potentially swap out some unhelpful coping strategies with more helpful coping strategies. And then the final 2 points that David made were bereavement and loss, and then managing anxiety. So we'll be signposting you to support for bereavement and anxiety as well today. So hopefully all of the themes that we've covered today, you'll have something to go away with. So most of us have many different areas that make up our lives, such as our family, our work, our hobbies. And these support us when we experience challenges in life. And an advantage of having lots of areas that support us means that it can act like a scaffolding to support us. So just like when we're repairing a house, we would put up scaffolding to support it. And David talked about a period of rebuilding. And in some ways, what we need to do is rebuild those support networks, rebuild those areas that support us and help us to cope with the demands on us. And so if we have a look here at person A, this is an example of someone who has just two areas that support them in their lives. They have their work and their relationship. And when this person begins to experience difficulties at work, for instance, they will then only have one area to support them. And so it may feel like a large part of their life is in turmoil as a result. So it's really important that we don't just have limited areas in our lives that support us, and we need to consider more areas. And as we can see with person B, when they experience difficulties at work, they will have a much wider range of support available to help them cope with the situation that they're in. And to them, it will feel like much less of a chunk of their life is in turmoil. So it's important to sit down and identify the areas of our lives that support us, those areas that give us a sense of purpose and enjoyment and meaning as well. And so what we might need to do is think about what is meaningful to us. And during lockdown, you may have noticed that you found yourself losing touch with yourselves and what is meaningful to you, maybe as a result of a change of routine and structure. And as a result, you may have noticed an imbalance in your life. And when we think about our values and meaning, and it's about considering the bigger picture of our life and all the different areas that make up our lives. And we can start to think about this a bit like a compass. And our values help guide the direction that we live our lives in. And these values are based on our past experiences, our cultural upbringings, things that we find enjoyable, beneficial and constructive to us. And the way that we express our values is through our behaviour. And sometimes, particularly I suppose during this last period of a few months, we may have found that our internal compass has become out of sync with our values, and we may be spending all our time in one area or maybe neglecting other areas. And when we have that imbalance, we can start to feel distressed as a result. And so, like the points on a compass, our values are things that we work towards. We never arrive there. So it's not about being perfect in every area of our lives that we find valuable and meaningful. It's about working towards those goals in those areas. So when we are setting goals for ourselves, we can see them as a journey rather than a destination. And it can be helpful to consider all the different areas in our lives and reflect on how important they are to us. And then once we've considered their importance, we then may need to consider how much what we do actually reflects this importance. And what we might find is that there's an imbalance. And if there is, this is maybe where we want to set some goals. So here is a value direction wheel, and this is an example of how you might start to consider your own values and how important they are and how closely met each of those values are. So if you look at this wheel, we have a number of areas that lots of people find valuable and meaningful in their lives. Some of these may not be important to you, and there might be some that are missing, in which case add them into your own personal value directions. But it's important to think about each area and to give each, and as you can see, there are 2 ratings next to each one. One is an importance rating, so how important this value is to you. And there's also a how closely met rating, so how in line with that value are you living your life. And recently, you may not be as in line with some of these areas as you would like. For example, I'll just pick out a couple. Perhaps for work and career, maybe you've been furloughed and you're not actually able to work right now. And that might be really challenging because that loss of role that you potentially really enjoyed. Or perhaps spirituality, maybe you really enjoy going for worship and that hasn't been possible for a long time. And so meeting together in congregations has been a big loss for you. And so it may be that we need to think about how you can think about each of these areas, and once you've considered how important they are to you and how in line you're living your life with them right now, it's about setting some goals to work towards that importance level. So as you can see, sometimes our values are undermet and sometimes they're overmet. So for relationships, I put 9 out of 10 importance, and I gave an example of 10 out of 10 closely met, because we may be spending a lot more time with our partners than we normally do, and it may be a bit much for some of us. I just thought I'd put that in as a cheeky example, but sometimes we can be putting more effort and energy into things than we value, and sometimes we're putting in less effort, so we need to kind of bring them up to a balance. So have a go at this, and have a go at working out how important each of these areas are and how closely met they are. And when you come to set your goals, it's about choosing the ones with the greatest discrepancy, so the ones where there's a big gap between how important they are and how closely met they are. Just a brief note on unhelpful coping. Some of us may rely on some unhelpful coping strategies as a reaction to stress. And it doesn't mean that you're a bad person. This is often the best way that we know how to cope. And so it's just about identifying those, and some of the ones we've identified are avoidance or procrastination, drinking more alcohol, taking recreational drugs, comfort eating, avoiding friends, or rumination and worry. So you might be dwelling and ruminating a lot about some of the challenges that you've been experiencing. And so I wanted to highlight some more helpful coping strategies as a way to help you to move away from those unhelpful strategies. And it's worthwhile thinking about what's worked for you in the past. So what strategies have improved your mood in the past that are really positive for you? And we've got some examples here, talking to friends or loved ones, exercise, mindfulness, protesting and lobbying. These are some examples of helpful coping and helpful action. So bringing all of these ideas together, the scaffolding, the value directions to rebuild your routine and your life in a way that's meaningful, and kind of planning in some more helpful coping strategies, what I'd like you to do is to have a go at planning 2 to 3 small activities to do over the next week, which will help you start to think about these things and reconnect and rebuild your life. David talked earlier about bereavement and loss, and you may have been prevented from grieving how you would have wanted to. Some funerals were unable to happen or have very limited number of attendees. And because of the virus, we may need to think differently about how to grieve. And so you may need to find your own way to mark someone's passing, whether that's on your own or with others. And most people experience grief when they lose something. Or someone important to them. So if these feelings are affecting you and your life, there are things that you can do to help, and support is available if you are finding it hard to cope with this sense of loss and bereavement. And so we do recommend the Cruise. They're a fantastic bereavement organisation, and so if you do feel like you need more support with grief and loss, then please call them on 0808 808 1677. And David also talked about a climate of fearfulness, and you may be experiencing high levels of anxiety around catching the virus. And so we wanted you to consider how to support you with this, because there's an element here that might be managing anxiety, but there's also an element that might be protecting yourself or your vulnerable family members. And it is incredibly difficult to sit with this level of anxiety. So it may be making those important steps to put precautions in place to protect yourself. But if you are finding that you're frozen by fear and worry, then it may be that anxiety management would be helpful for you. So you can watch our previous webinar on managing anxiety and worry, along with other webinars that we've listed here that you can register for on this link. So our take-home messages from today, and we don't expect to just shrug it off. It's important to prepare for a period of rebuilding in your life, whether that's rebuilding your relationships using that scaffolding technique, or re-establishing your routines and what's meaningful and important to you using the value direction wheel. Or perhaps it's considering positive outlets for anger and frustration by focusing on building helpful coping strategies. Or maybe it's about identifying a way to mark someone's passing, or contacting Cruise if you feel that you need more support for loss and bereavement. And if you are experiencing high levels of anxiety, then watch our Managing Anxiety webinar. So what we'd like you to do now, just before we finish, is to choose one of these ideas from today's webinar that you will action this week. So choose one of these options, A, B, C, D or E, that you want to have a go at. And if you go into the comment section of the Q&A and find the option that's relevant that you want to try, and click like, and then we'll come back to that. We have 2 more webinars if you want to attend. We've got managing financial anxiety and sleep, so come along to those and you can register for those here. If you feel like you need more immediate support, then we recommend IAPT services. They're free NHS services that you can register for using this link and type in your postcode. If you feel like you need more urgent support for your mood, you're having thoughts of harming yourself in any way, then we recommend that you contact your GP. If that's not something you feel able to do or you can't do right now, then the Samaritans or Shout, who offer a confidential 24/7 crisis service. If you're not sure what support you need, then the NHS urgent support guidance that we've linked here might be beneficial to you. You will also find in this slide deck some other useful resources and links. Some of these are BAME specific, so we have Local Mind, which might help you find available support groups in your area, Black Thrive, the Chinese Mental Health Association, and Sharing Voices. These are some really fantastic organisations that are here to support you at this time. We really do value your feedback, so if you have any feedback, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on how you found today's webinar. So this link will be in the Q&A, so if you click on it, you will be able to respond and let us know how you found today. So for the rest of the time, we don't have long. I do apologise, we're running a bit behind today on our webinar. We had so much to fit into the hour period, but we do want to hear a bit more from David and from you. And so if you have any questions that you'd like to ask David or myself, then please ask them now, and we will spend the last few minutes and hand the time over to David to answer any of your questions. Thank you.
We've covered everything. I noticed one or two of the responses there. Thank you very much. I appreciate that the folks saying that they feel I've covered everything. I really appreciate that. Thank you very much.
And there's a thanks, David, great session as well. And it has been a great session, David. So thank you so much for taking the time out to join us today.
It's a pleasure. Yeah.
We've just had a question come in asking David, should we feel guilty if things are seemingly going better given COVID?
Could you repeat that?
Should we feel guilty if things are seemingly going better given COVID?
I don't think so. I don't think so. You know, we're a long way to get out of the woods yet. I mean, you know, it might feel things are better at the moment, and it'd be great if that's sustainable. But you know, there's a while to go. There's a while to go.
And I think I agree with David, is that it's I guess making the most of when things are going better, because as he said, you know, we don't know how things are going to go, and we're not necessarily out of the woods yet. So it's important to, I guess, appreciate the times when things are improving and feeling better. We also have another one. What can we do as a community instead of being held by fear? Any thoughts, David?
Well, I think some of the things that you suggested, Emily, I think it needs to be on several levels. It needs to be on the level of what people can do and feel that they can do for themselves, and also at the level of what people can do in solidarity with others. And again, I think it's an exploratory journey for everybody. The most important thing is not to get paralysed in isolation and fear. To be able to feel that there's always a forward movement that you're making.
Yes, absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. It can be really hard when we are frozen by fear, but we need to find ways where we can reach out together and come together as a community. And I guess, you know, thinking about your own values and setting those goals in terms of what you enjoy about connecting with your community, and what you find meaningful about that as well. And, you know, if no one else is doing it, then get out there and be a champion for connecting with your community and getting that going again.
Yeah, and I'd also say, which relates to something else I'm doing at the moment, you can have fun and it's radical and revolutionary. Absolutely.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, David, and for everyone's contributions today and for your interaction. It's been really, really wonderful to be part of. So thank you for joining us today, David, and for all of you as well. Thank you for being here.
Thanks very much. Okay, take care now.
Lovely. Well, that's all for today. Come join us on our last couple of webinars, and we look forward to seeing you again. All the best. Take care.